Just standing in your kitchen right now, not literally, not in any way you could point to or photograph or prove to the person standing next to you, but she's there, in the way the morning light hits the counter at a specific angle that you've never once thought to question, in the particular temperature of the room at 7 in the morning before anyone has spoken, in the habit you developed years ago of leaving a small space on the left side of the bed, not because you were told to, not because a book recommended it, not because of any conscious decision you can trace back to a moment. You just always left it, like a placeholder, like a note you wrote to the future that said, "This spot is reserved. I don't know for who yet, but I know it isn't for me." Something is hidden in your home, not an object, not a letter tucked behind a drawer, not a letter tucked behind a drawer, not a photograph curled at the edges waiting to be found. Something older than any of that, something that doesn't have a shape you can hold, but has a weight you felt without knowing you were feeling it. It lives in the architecture of your smallest habits, in the things you chose without knowing you were choosing, in the spaces you kept and the spaces you filled and the spaces you circled without ever landing in like an orbit that's been waiting for gravity to make sense. I want to talk about what your home knows about you that you haven't admitted to yourself yet, because I believe, and I've believed this for a long time, quietly in the way you believe things that you can't prove but can't release. I believe that our interiors reflect each other, the interior of the place we live and the interior of who we are, not in the decorating magazine sense, not in the you are what you own sense, which is a lie that sells furniture, in a deeper sense, in the sense that the way we arrange our physical world is a map of what we're carrying inside it. The things we keep, the things we can't bring ourselves to throw away, even though we haven't touched them in years, and we cannot articulate, when pressed, exactly why they still have a claim on us. The things we buy in multiples without thinking, 2 coffee mugs on a hook, 2 chairs at a small table, 2 of something, always 2 of something, even when you've been living alone. You didn't think about that until just now. I can tell. Go look. I'm serious. Go look at your kitchen right now. Count the mugs on the hook. Count the chairs at the table. Look at the couch. Look at which side of it is slightly more worn, which side holds the impression of you, and then notice the other side. The side that hasn't been sat on. The side that's been, in its quiet way, preserved. That is not nothing. That is your soul making a declaration that your mouth hasn't made yet. That is the part of you that is older and wiser and less frightened than your ordinary thinking self, arranging the physical world into a shape that says, "I am expecting someone, I don't know when, I don't know how, but the chair is ready, the mug is on the hook, the side of the bed is clear. I have, without any conscious intention, been setting a place at the table for someone whose name I don't know yet, and whose face I haven't seen. I want to tell you about the hidden things I've found in my own home, not because my story is the point is yours, but because sometimes you need to hear something spoken out loud before you can recognize it in your own life. Sometimes someone has to name a thing before you understand that you've been living inside it. I found a playlist I made years ago, not a playlist I remember making, not something I constructed with intention and purpose. A playlist that apparently assembled itself in late nights and early mornings over the course of something like 2 years, song by song, in the way you build things when you're not watching yourself build. And I looked at it, really looked at it, not just shuffled past it, and what I heard was not a collection of songs I liked. What I heard was a love letter, to no one specific, to the idea of someone, to the shape of what I was hoping for rendered in music. Because music can hold feelings that have no other container. Every song on that playlist was about a particular kind of love, not passion, not desire, not the electric, urgent, combustible thing that burns bright and demands attention. Something slower, something that assumed permanence, something that said I am building something that will last, and I need the person beside me to be building too, and the love between us will be less like fire and more like light. Constant, sourceless, everywhere at once, and so present that you stop noticing it the way you stop noticing air, which is not because it's unimportant, but because it has become the element you live in. I made that playlist before I met her, long before, and every song on it is a song that now, On the other side of having found her, I recognize as accurate, as prescient, as evidence that something in me was composing the anthem of a life I hadn't lived yet, but somehow already knew. Your home is doing the same thing, right now, whether you know it or not. Think about what's on your bedside table, not what you think should be there, not the curated version you'd photograph for someone's benefit, the real version. The actual population of your bedside table at 11 o'clock at night when you can't sleep and the room is dark except for the light of your phone. What's there? A book you've been meaning to finish for 6 months? A glass of water that you refill but never fully drink? A photograph? A piece of paper with something written on it that you don't need practically but can't bring yourself to move? Something someone gave you that has no function except to be there, to occupy space, to be the last thing you see before you stop looking. Every one of those things is a signal. Every one of those things is your interior self making a statement about what matters, what you're holding on to, what you're holding on to, what you're hoping toward. The bedside table is maybe the most honest piece of furniture in any home because it's the one we maintain almost entirely unconsciously. We don't design it, we don't style it, we accumulate it, and accumulation is always more honest than intention. What you reach for in the dark is more true about you than anything you'd say about yourself in daylight. And I want to ask you something. I want to ask it directly without soften it because I think you're someone who can handle a direct question. When you imagine, not when you plan, not when you strategize, just when you imagine, in the loose, unguarded way you do when you're between sleeping and waking, when you imagine the life you want, is there someone in the room? Is there a specific quality of presence that you're imagining? Not necessarily a face, not necessarily a name, but a warmth, a weight on the other side of the bed, a voice in the kitchen before you've gotten up, a laugh that arrives from another room and lands in your chest in a particular way. Person who, when they walk through the door at the end of the day, changes the quality of the air in a way you can feel without being able to measure. Is that person already in your home in some form that hasn't taken physical shape yet? I think they might be. I think the evidence is everywhere, if you know how to look for it. Here's what I mean by that. Our homes are not passive. They are not neutral containers that we fill with our stuff and then inhabit without consequence. Our homes are active. They are in constant conversation with us. They reflect us back to ourselves in ways we're usually too busy to notice, too distracted to read, too comfortable in the familiarity of it all to see clearly. You stop seeing your own home after a while. You stop registering the details. You move through it on autopilot, navigating by memory rather than attention, and in doing so you miss all the messages it's been leaving you. Messages in the form of empty spaces you haven't filled, objects you've kept without knowing why, arrangements that make no practical sense in every emotional sense. Your home knows things about you that you haven't said out loud yet, and some of those things are about love. Some of those things are about her, or him, or the specific unnamed someone who's been without announcement, without drama, without any of the fanfare we associate with arrival, taking up residence in the space between the life you're living and the life you're moving toward. I want to tell you about the drawer. You know the drawer I mean. Every home has one. The drawer, that is, on its surface, chaotic batteries, and take-out menus and a lighter from 2 apartments ago, and a pen that you're not sure works, and a key that you've kept for 8 years even though you are genuinely uncertain what it opens. The drawer of miscellaneous things. The drawer of items that don't belong anywhere specific, and so belong everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. The junk drawer, people call it. And I want to tell you that junk drawer is one of the most psychologically revealing objects in your home, because what you keep in it is what you can't let go of but can't integrate. It's the holding area for things that might still be useful, things you haven't made a final decision about, things you're keeping in case. In case of what? In case you need them, in case something changes, in case the situation that made this object necessary comes back around, or finally arrives for the first time. You kept the key because you don't know what it opens, and that bothers you less than you'd expect. You kept the lighter even though you don't smoke and haven't smoked and probably won't smoke, because some part of you remembers a night around a fire, a night when things were warm and slow and possible. You kept the batteries because you believe in being prepared, because you have learned, somewhere along the way, through something that happened, that it is better to be ready for something that might not come than to be unprepared for something that does. You are, in a very literal sense, keeping things for a future you haven't experienced yet. And you are doing this with your heart too, with the most private and protected room in your interior life. You are keeping things, keeping room, keeping possibilities open that the voice of practicality has told you to close. And you haven't listened to that voice. Not completely, not where it counts. That is not weakness. That is not weakness. That is not weakness. That is not naivety. That is the oldest, wisest part of you operating without your permission, doing what it knows how to do, which is to stay ready, to keep the door from completely closing, to hold the space. I found something else in my home, a habit I didn't know I had until someone pointed it all to me when I cooked just for myself, which I did for years, alone in various kitchens in various apartments. I always make slightly too much, always. Not dramatically too much, not a quantity that would make sense to describe as making extra. Just a little more than one person needs, enough for a bowl that's never quite emptied, enough that there's always something left over, something waiting in the refrigerator in a container with a lid, something that could be shared if there were someone to share it with. I never acknowledged this while I was doing it. I noticed it after the fact when I started cooking for two and realized the quantities had barely changed, because I had already been cooking for two. I had been, without knowing it, setting a place at the table for someone who hadn't yet found the address. What is your equivalent? What is the small, unconscious, beautiful, heartbreaking thing that you do that is evidence of exactly this? The keeping of space, the preservation of possibility, the stubborn, quiet refusal of the deepest part of you to accept a life in which love does not arrive. Think about it. Think about it honestly, without the armor of irony, without the protection of telling yourself that it's just a habit, that it means nothing, that you're reading too much into the way you always leave the inside seat at a restaurant, or always save the last good thing on the plate, or always sleep on one side. The armor is understandable. The armor exists because you've been hurt, or because you're afraid of being hurt, or because you've watched other people be hurt and you made a decision somewhere along the way not to want something so specifically that its absence would break you. The armor is not a character flaw. It is a reasonable response to being a person in a world that doesn't always give you what you need. I understand the armor. I've worn versions of it myself. But here's what I know about armor. I know that it keeps things out. That is its purpose, and it is effective at its purpose. What we don't always account for is that it keeps things out indiscriminately. It cannot distinguish between the thing you need protection from and the thing you need access to. It keeps out harm and it keeps out love with equal efficiency, because from the outside, from the defended distance, they can look very similar. They both want to get close. They both want to change something in you. They both ask for openness. And openness is frightening when you've experienced what it feels like for openness to be used against you. So we build rooms inside ourselves with no doors. We decide that certain wants are too vulnerable to be wants, so we reclassify them. We call them preferences instead of needs. We call them nice to haves instead of necessary. We make them small so that their potential absence is manageable. And then we live with the strange, persistent, inexplicable ache of having made ourselves small to fit inside a life that should have been larger. I'm not telling you to take the armor off. I'm not telling you to fling yourself open to every possibility without discernment. That is not wisdom. That is just another kind of hurt waiting to happen. What I'm telling you is something subtler, something that I believe you already know in the quiet, which is why you're here, which is why you're clicked, which is why you're still watching right now instead of having moved on to something easier. I'm telling you that the thing hidden in your home is hope, unkillable, stubborn, specific, private, slightly embarrassing hope. The two mugs, the empty side of the bed, the playlist that assembled itself into a love letter, the food cooked in slightly too large a quantity for one person, the drawer of things kept in cash, E. The key that opens something you haven't found yet. All of it is hope, made physical. All of it is the truest part of you refusing to stop believing that love is coming, that it's on its way, that it already knows your address. And now I want to say something that might be the most important thing I've said in this entire video, and I want you to hear it carefully. I want you to hear it without immediately deflecting it or filing it away as sentiment. The love you're holding space for, the specific quality of presence that you imagine in loose, unguarded moments, the warmth on the other side of the bed, the voice from the kitchen, the laugh from the other room. That love is not a fantasy, it is not a compensation for loneliness. That love is not a fantasy, it is not a story you tell yourself to make the present more bearable. It is a signal, it is your inner self, which is the most accurate instrument you own, telling you something true about what exists and what is possible, what is on its way to you. The longing itself is the evidence, not of lack, but of proximity. You do not long for things that have no relationship to reality. You do not ache for things that do not exist in any form anywhere. The very specificity of what you want, not just love in the abstract, but this quality of love, this texture of presence, this particular warmth. The specificity is telling you that somewhere in the world, that specific thing exists, because you couldn't have imagined it from nothing, because the imagination does not work that way. We can only recognize the shape of something we have, in some form already encountered, even if the encounter was not physical, even if it happened in the only place some encounters happen, which is in the soul. Before our eyes met, our souls recognized each other. That is what I believe. That is what my own experience has shown me. And I believe it is happening for you too, right now. In this exact season of your life, in this apartment or house or room that holds, in its quiet and overlooked corners, all the evidence of a love that is already more present than you know. Go home tonight, or look up from this screen if you're already there, and look at it differently. Look at it the way you would look at a letter that has been sitting unopened on the counter for years. Not with the eyes of habit and familiarity and the accumulated blindness of a life lived inside one place. With new eyes, with honest eyes, with the eyes of someone who is willing to see what has been there all along. The extra mug, the empty chair, the side of the bed. The key you've kept for 8 years. Your soul has been writing you love letters in the language of objects and habits and spaces, and you have been living inside them without reading them. Tonight, read them. Tonight, understand what they've been telling you, which is not that something is missing, but that something is coming, that something has, in all the ways that matter, already arrived. It was there before you knew to look for it, hidden in plain sight, hidden in your home, hidden in the specific, unremarkable, absolutely sacred details of how you have been, without knowing it, all this time, getting ready. She's standing in your kitchen right now, and somewhere, in an apartment with a yellow lamp and rain on the windows, you are standing in hers.